go ahead and get started. Let's take just a minute here, and I know some of you have already spoken. But let's get a kind of an introduction from each of you. Brett, why don't we start with you?
Hi, my name is Brett Andrews. I am the Vice President for Graduate and Professional Studies at Oklahoma Wesleyan University. My office is here in Bartlesville.
Great.
What else do I need to throw out there, Josh?
That's a pretty good summary. Maybe some of the places what you've been at a number of places in the last decade. Tell us a little bit about what other places you've been and the experiences there.
Yeah, I'm a faculty member who came up through the ranks into academic administration, and I always kind of fell into the niche of having feet in both worlds between a traditional college of business and an adult-oriented treatment. And so started out life at Oral Roberts University, then went to LeTourneau University as assistant dean, came here to Oklahoma Wesleyan as dean and then vice president, went to Tabor College as executive vice president, went from there to Newman University, also in Wichita, Kansas, and then was just recently asked to come back and lead some changes here at Oklahoma Wesleyan. So I've been here about 8 months.
Good deal. Good deal. Okay, Brian, how about you? Give us an introduction of who you are.
Associate Provost for Online Studies at Columbia International University. This is my 7th year. Also professor here, came to lead the PhD in Educational Leadership program. Came up through K-12 Christian education. Started as a math teacher, became an elementary principal at 26, head of school at 29. So everybody's thrilled about my breadth and depth of experience during those years. And then moved from there to Indiana Wesleyan, where I served as the vice president for university relations. From there, I became the president of ACSI, Colorado Springs. From there to here to CIU. I tell everybody I'm trying to help people along the way, not to make all the mistakes I made during all of those years.
Very good. Dr. George, how about you?
Sure. I have actually been privileged to be part of online education in several roles. As a student, I took in all of the content, some good, some painful content. And then as an instructional designer and trainer, I've worked with different stakeholders to design some good content, create engaging learning experiences, and also train faculty who are new to this world. My experience also includes working with English language learners, and that role has helped me develop a sensitivity to the learner who often needs some intentional scaffolding in order to be successful. Before my husband and I moved to Tulsa, we lived and worked in Bahrain. It's a beautiful island. Incidentally, it was recently in the news for signing a peace treaty with Israel. So anyway, in Bahrain, I worked with adult English learners who needed English language skills for the workplace. I've been at Oral Roberts University for the past 10 years now, first as a student and then as faculty. I'm also a master reviewer with Quality Matters, and that has given me a lot of insight into how some of the other higher ed institutions across the nation manage their online classes. Just recently, I started a new role at ORU in the Undergrad College of Education. I'm their ELL coordinator. In other words, I work with teacher candidates who want to teach English learners. So my role is to prepare them for a classroom that neither of us have seen yet. So that means there's a lot of speculation, a lot of preparation, a lot of research into the needs of the new learner. That just means there's never a dull moment in my world. And today, that includes joining this timely conversation. So thank you for inviting me, and I'm excited to be here.
Thanks so much. Dr. Tim Eades, how about you? Share with us who you are and where you've been, et cetera.
Thank you, Dr. Fisher. Good to be a part of this group today and be a part of this conference. I am at Southern Nazarene University. I serve as the provost of SNU. Came on board in June of 2019 and got my start in Christian higher education in 1994 as a rookie admissions counselor. I went in the office, they handed me a catalog, and off I went to my first college fair. This was at Mount Vernon Nazarene University. I ended up serving 7 years at Mount Vernon. Over the course of these 26 or so years, I've served at Mount Vernon Nazarene. The last decade I've spent at Ohio Christian University and Trevecca Nazarene University, and just been a part of some wonderful work in adult, graduate, and online programming. So came to SNU The draw for me was to be able to work with all facets of the faculty and all sides of the house in this new role. I was looking to be stretched, and it's proven to do just that in every sort of way. We had 3 accreditation visits my first fall: HLC, CCNE, and ACBSP, along with XYZ, came to town in the fall of 2019. I thought spring of 2020 was going to be my, kind of getting back to normal period of time, but it proved to be much even more disruptive than 3 accreditation visits.
That's saying something.
Yeah, COVID-19 has been amazing, but I'm so grateful for my teams, my faculty, the way that we have survived and thrived through this period of time. Again, really nice to be with you today.
Thanks, Tim. Dr. Castleman, how about you?
Great. Tim and I have a similar journey. I started out at Mount Vernon Nazarene University in admissions 24 years ago, and then moved into advancement, a director of advancement, and from there I went to Nazarene Theological Seminary to be the chief enrollment officer, and from there I've been at IWU for the past 17 years. I'm in my 17 years, and here at IWU I've been in just about every position you can think of, starting in services to director of faculty to dean, to associate vice president to vice president. So it's my pleasure to be here and to learn with each of you.
Thanks, everyone. As a note about today's panel, kind of the focus of today's discussion is on the importance of online education from inside the institution. So the perspectives everyone's bringing today is from the inside, not to say that they don't have an external, because a number of them have served as consultants, look at it from the outside, but the focus is really on the what do we look at it from the inside. And so each of these guys, as you've heard, have served in those internal roles, and that's the perspective we're going to look at today. So let's start out with a first question. From a budgetary perspective, about what percentage of revenue does the online program make up at your institution, if you're able to share that or know that number?
I don't have the exact number, but I can tell you at IWU, it makes up a significant portion. I would say it's well over 60%.
Okay.
Yeah, similar here at Oklahoma Wesleyan, we're in excess of 45% of total university revenues.
Okay, good deal.
I think we're a little bit on the other side of this sphere as we are just coming into sort of the development of our online programming. So I would say we're about at 15% of the overall net tuition revenue of the school comes in through the online modality at this point.
Okay, all right. When you guys think about the adult and online formats, why are they so important for an institution in today's higher ed scene?
I'll jump out here. I wrote a book about this a couple of years ago, but running a college and university is kind of a difficult prospect on a good day, because you have to be both a hotbed of innovation and staunch defenders of the status quo. It's kind of the intersection of the two. But what a lot of us miss is the moving trend that is the way society wants to engage higher education. And many times we find ourselves slightly off of where society is, and we end up following the trend instead of leading it. And that becomes a difficult prospect. And that's why you see a slightly different treatment across all colleges and universities about how much and when they're following that market into first it was the one night a week at a remote location kind of format, or a compressed lockstep modular. And then it was online, and we see the various advances in other than traditional campus delivery, and you see the universities kind of following that along the way. So I think it has to do with that moving flavor of society about how they want to engage and digest the products that we offer.
That's good. Anyone else?
Also, I look at it from a missional standpoint at CIU. Our mission statement says we educate from a biblical worldview, impact the nations with the message of Christ. And so the way I see online is simply put, the Lord is bringing the nations to us. And so it's a wonderful opportunity for us.
Well said.
Janet, you were starting to say something. Go ahead.
Yes, yes. ORU, I mean, what I just heard is kind of an echo of where I was going, because ORU's vision is to, take the gospel, take the light to the uttermost bounds of the earth. And online really is a medium, is the medium, I believe, to how to fulfill that mission. And studies show that 2 out of 3 college students today are adults. They are financially independent. They are parents, and they need learning. So as colleges and higher ed institutions, we better be ready to provide what they need. Otherwise, we're going to lose them. They're going to learn one way or the other. So we can't afford to lose them. That's the trend.
That's great.
I'll mention one more thing from an internal perspective, and we can kind of give away our past by our little journey that we all just shared. So I'll just say what I'm about to say is not CIU. Okay. But I can remember, sitting at the president's cabinet and having discussions every year that sounded like, on an X number of $100 of million budget a year, why can't College of Arts and Sciences sit on its own bottom? And it's because of climbing walls and glass-fronted handball courts and all the rest. And not to mention we're feeding students, housing students, athletics. And that's not even counting facilities, right? And so, and I remember that institution, the closest we could ever get was like $3 million in the red. The opposite is happening here now at CIU. We're actually moving toward being able to take gift income from donors toward what I call cubby holes, the sweet spot of donor intent and university need, where they overlap, versus keeping the lights on. And online has the potential to close that gap, in my experience here at CIU, in a pretty tangible, dramatic way. So back to the budget question, I think it's not so much, what percentage of the budget is, but rather I think we should be looking at hours sold and positive net income, because that really tells the better story.
Sure. Carson, you were going to say something, I think.
Yeah, I was going to say, we also look as a mission, but I think the thing that we always focus on here at IW is we always say we're the second chance institution. For those people who need a second chance, for those people who didn't finish their college degree as they go through. And you look at the statistics from the last numbers, the 25 years up of age and up who do not have a degree. I mean, it is staggering. Most people would say, oh, I don't believe the numbers, but it is staggering. Less than 1% have a doctorate, 7% have a master's, 13% have a bachelor's, 19% have an associate's, 28% have attempted college but never finished from that 25 years of the adult and up. So it is an opportunity from a missional, but it's also for the second chance. And we also believe it becomes a generational thing, that when parents become educated, then their children become the C education process and the opportunity, which will ultimately change the world. And that's how we see it.
Yeah. In that aspect, and I know I'm biased when I say this, but I always felt that we were able to accomplish the mission better. Again, very biased. We were able to accomplish the mission better through the adult and online programs, because we did reach out in a way that the traditional campus just wasn't designed to do. So we had access to a bigger population, et cetera. Let's talk about some of the exemplars that we see in the field today. From your experience, what are some of the things that you have seen that have been like the best examples of online education of institutions out there? And now let's jump to Tim Eades for this one first, just to go first.
I think that one of the things that I learned early on, I shifted from traditional enrollment management to running all aspects of the adult graduate online programming in 2007. And one of the things I realized is how much I didn't know at that period of time. I had fancied myself an expert at getting freshmen and transfers to apply to our traditional area, but really was out of my depth and in the deep end of the pool, so to speak, in regards to the adult graduate and online area. So I really started studying success, and I started studying success of the peer institutions. I became, a person that studied Indiana Wesleyan and their work, the early days of Grand Canyon University, the early days of Colorado Christian and their evolution. My wife was going to this little school over in Virginia called Liberty, and I was watching pretty closely what Liberty was doing. And, that really was something that I felt like, my key to trying to lead successful endeavors at the schools I've served has really been, this question is really close to my heart because it really has been studying models of who is accomplishing what and what might that look like at the institution I get to serve. So I guess what is the old adage about emulation being the highest form of flattery or something like that, but it's certainly something that I've given a lot of attention to these last 13 years.
Sure, sure. Well, there's certainly some good examples in the list that you gave there. Who else would like to chime in on this one?
Sure. I have two favorite examples when it comes to really great examples of online education. One is, I believe it's the Arizona State University. They have these try before you buy programs where students can go in, try it out, see if they like it. And if they're happy, then they buy, they take it for academic credit. I believe that kind of gives a flexibility to the adult learner who they're spoiled for choice. Mm-hmm. There's so much out there. So giving them this option, I think it's a great way to kind of sell them on what you have and your product and your service. So I like that. I'm trying to get my university to do something along those lines as well. That's one. And the other example is really some of the grad programs that we offer at ORU, especially with the leadership programs. A lot of times people are unhappy about online classes because they complain about the lack of engagement and the lack of support. So we have 7-week classes, but the way the grad programs are designed, there are 3 or 4 modules of 2 weeks each. And every 2 weeks, there's a meetup. So what happens in the meetup, it's not just the professor, lecturing and everybody is just zoned out, but you really have work to do during that meetup, like all of the students. So we're seeing a healthy relationship that's being cultivated in each cohort, because then even after they finish the class, these people are each other's support. And they're out there in the real world, drawing examples from their real world of work, and then being able to put it into practice. So these are 2 examples that really stand out to me in terms of applicability and really reaching your online learner.
Sure.
One place I went and spent some time, I got in, and they're not a Christian institution, but I was very intrigued with Southern New Hampshire University. So I went and spent 3 days with them, and I was very intrigued by what they truly do and how they do it. It's innovation. Mm-hmm. They place a lot of insight, a lot of direction, and a lot of research on innovation, and I was extremely impressed with that. I think if there's one thing I think no one has mastered yet, and I think if you do, you become the know-all of all know-all, is the retention, is to retain these students. Even the big wigs like Southern New Hampshire, and no one has mastered this retention initiative yet. And I think there's people making strides, but no one has mastered it.
Right, right. Any other comments? Okay, let's move from the positive to the negative. And of course, none of your institutions are going to be negative examples, right? I would not recommend that. But let's talk about some of the mistakes that have been made without mentioning the names, and talk about whether they are just doing their regular online programming or their emergency remote teaching examples, where a college had to jump in because of COVID to this emergency remote teaching, but didn't do it well. What are some of the examples of what has been done that probably shouldn't have been done?
Go ahead, Brett.
Oh, thank you. I think I can speak about this in generalities. This was the one question that I thought about most in coming here today. And I kind of came up with 3 buckets, and I'll just call them that. Sometimes they overlap, but generally not. One is to assume that the customer, now let me rephrase that the university makes the strategic mistake in asking itself the question, are we a university that also has online, or did we, with intentionality, build an online degree? There's a dramatic difference between the two. And that, I would say, is one mistake that I've heard these conversations, but also seen it where they think, well, we'll just slap something together and call it online and we'll push it out there and then we'll be fine. Yeah. And that's really just simply not the case, and certainly is not the case anymore. Right. Two, the second mistake is if you have online, thinking that again, thinking about building it with quality, making the mistake in thinking that faculty members who are great as subject matter experts are also great in the role of instructional designer. The roles could not be more different, but at a lot of small programs, I see them trying to force the square peg in the round hole here. Mm-hmm. Faculty members are either great as in-person teachers, and some of them are great as online teachers, but it's the really rare cat that's great at both. And then you have a unicorn if you've got somebody who's great at both and is then also an instructional designer. That's really rare. So with intentionality, building a structure that helps support the online enterprise as well. And then third is timing. A lot of us got forced into the game. Some of us had the foresight to get in while the getting was good, but now we even see the state universities who had been resistant to online learning for years and years, making some good strategic moves. And here I'm thinking about big moves. Purdue with Purdue University Global, Arizona State with its moves, University of Arizona trying to copy that by purchasing, was it Thunderbird or one of the others that causes an uproar on their campus. But what's really happening here is what you're seeing is that whatever free market share might be out there is already taken, and now the process has started that it's consolidating. And if we're not intentional about owning our own backyard as small colleges and universities with our online programs, we will quickly find the future written for us by somebody else.
Good points. Good points.
Thanks, Brad. It's interesting. This is the one that captivated my mind also as I looked through it. And there's two things I came up with. And the first one is I believe that a lot of institutions miss out on the customer service culture. And what I mean by that is, we've for so long, here at IWU, we know it. We open the doors they used to flood in. I mean, that's just the bottom line. Now it's a whole different world. You've got competition from state and private and every other place. But so it's that customer service culture. And what I mean is it's gone from personal to transactional. And that is in the areas of, I think financial aid, student accounts, student services. They're all divided up in different areas. Not one person is overseeing it. Not one person is focusing on what I call the student experience. And the student experience is essential to the overall matriculation to graduation and word of mouth component of getting out. So I think that is one of the biggest issues and areas that people are missing the mark on. And my second one is this, and this is, I think a lot of us is, we have just gone to what I call the curriculum in a box. We're going to do 2 discussions, 300 words, APA, 1 paper, and we're not engaging. We're not having any kind of innovation. We're not building any kind of relationship in those online endeavors. And I think there is such great opportunity to do those things and do them well. And I hesitate to say this, but I have been doing focus groups with students. One of the things that we've been looking at here at IWU is, why are students so enamored with this Sophia Learning? If you don't know about it, go check it out. And that Sophia Learning is owned by Capella, and why these students are enjoying it. And it's $79 a month to join it, and then you get these classes. But if you take a Sophia class, you'll begin to see how it is much different than what we see is in the online environment today, with 2 discussions, 300 words, and APA. Okay, those aren't discussions, those are mini papers. And then we go on and then we say you write another paper. So I think those two areas that I just talked about, the student experience and this curriculum in a box, is where a lot of us have gone wrong.
Okay. Janet or Brian, do you have anything to add?
I think it's that mistake of emergency remote teaching is what you called it, you know, and I think a lot of institutions were forced into that this year, where they took a course that was rich because of the professor and their personality, and they just kind of just dumped it into the online setting, and suddenly doesn't hold any weight anymore. Right. The professor isn't available to kind of peek over your shoulder and say, no, this is how you do that, or this is how you work on the project. So like, just as all of the points that were mentioned here, there's a lack of interaction, a lack of engagement. Those tools haven't been built in, and a lot of a lot of classes are not mobile friendly. Yeah. Your online learner today is so used to just picking up their phone and looking for whatever they need to look up, and a lot of our courses are not set up that way. And that's a huge issue for the student who lives with their phone.
Yeah, yeah. Brian, I think you said in your session this morning about how the perception of online education has gone down considerably because of the emergency remote teaching situation. Was that you this morning?
Yeah, I've read several articles about that and research projects that are beginning to emerge. And just anecdotally from the consulting that I do, it's so interesting, because when you talk to, in the higher ed setting, provosts or, you know, people of that ilk, our ilk, right, all of us, or you talk to heads of schools, and I work a number of larger K-12 Christian schools, and I serve on the board of a Christian school here, Ben Lippin, and I've experienced online learning from the desk of my kindergarten son last year too, in a very prestigious K-12 Christian private school outside of Marietta, Georgia. And I will just tell you, the experience on the Tegan side of the table is very different than how that teacher thinks she's connecting with those kids. Yeah. And that's what the studies have begun to show. And I don't think anybody really thinks that emergency remote instruction is going to persist the way that we did it with the pandemic. But if there are some flip side positives, I think one is we're seeing this some at CIU. Some professors who were very reluctant to get into this world are now more interested in it. Yeah, that's a positive. I wanted to change this topic just a little bit, though. When I thought of this question, I wasn't thinking it so much through the lens of mistakes as I was, Josh, going back to your original, your opening remarks about the stacked S-curves and innovation. And if I were to go back and I'll just internalize it and say one of the mistakes that I've made, or one of the things that I struggle with, is knowing when to stack that next curve. Yeah, for sure. And I'll flesh that out a little bit. So a key piece of that, I think most places don't do well, is putting to rest degree programs that are not popular choices of students. I'll just say it that way, right? And then what you hear from people is, well, you know, it's not that big a deal because these students take this and this degree program, but this professor sticks around because they do this or that or the other thing, and it really doesn't cost us any money. I think that shows a profound lack of understanding of how money is spent, or the resources that are necessary to do this well and market it and support students and those kinds of things. And I just say, I think across the board, we don't put to rest unprofitable programs too. And I don't mean that to sound too harsh, but you know, in a case where we're not seeing growth, then we have to, as you said, or I think it was, I forget whose session it was, Tim Eller maybe, he said, Fuller, you got to transfer money. Yes. Well, yeah. You've got to stop stuff to have money to transfer. Right. Right. And we don't stop stuff typically because we know that those changes are connected with people and their livelihoods, and we're kind Christian people. Well, we're not good business people sometimes in that regard. And maybe we don't have quite the view of the sovereignty of God that we should have, because if we change things in good faith, God will take care of those people, either in our organizations or in other organizations. But if there's no margin, there's no mission. Mm-hmm. If there's no margin, there's no ministry. If we cease to operate according to sound business principles, we'll cease to have the opportunity to continue to do ministry. So that's kind of how I look at that. And then the other aspect of this that I think I've done relatively poorly, but I'm learning, is that I feel like I've not transitioned well from what external sources I need at certain points of time to where we are now to where I think we're going to be. And as you know, all of those things come with a price tag. So when we first started into this at CIU, we did almost everything with an external provider, and we paid, what I've learned to understand now is that about the top profit margin you can make, we were paying more than that for the service. Well, now I know that there's no possibility we'd have made money in this scenario. Now, the flip side is that we did get the entire seminary online during that time. So there was a tangible exchange for the services. But then there's a flip side lesson. Another mistake I made in that, and I think probably starting out, a lot of people make this mistake. My original thought was, how do I get what we have online? And now my thinking changed to, what is needed online? What are the opportunities online? And I think that's a very different way of thinking.
Yeah. Yeah. Tim, do you have anything to add?
Quite a while ago, one of my colleagues at Ohio Christian, Heidi Ventura, used to be Heidi Frederick, Heidi Ventura said, look at curriculum as a tapestry as opposed to a patchwork quilt. Now, I love my grandma's patchwork quilt, and I've had it for decades now. Grandma's gone and love her, and it's a great memory, but it is just that, patches and patches and patches that look very different. Heidi described the building of quality curriculum as that tapestry where one part fits with the other part, fits with the other part, fits with the other part. And so going back to the question on what mistakes I've seen, it's not looking at it from that 30,000 foot view at the beginning and building it with that tapestry mindset throughout. I've seen professors rush to get their course written, but not really giving proper due to the way it fits in the overall. And that really goes to going to what Carson was saying, that really goes to the customer experience.
Yeah.
It's always so disappointing where, boy, you're in the middle of a class, I'm like, man, I've been here before. We've been here before in this degree. And so it's just so good to have that feathered in and layered in from a tapestry standpoint. Just quick addition.
That's a great perspective to think about it. The conceptual framework has to be compatible across the programs, has to make sure that it melds well together. And so often we forget about that picture, that side of it, to really engage the learner if they're so that they're not having the same class over and over, which I've had that happen in some of my degree programs. Is I had this one faculty member who taught the classes, but she taught the same information for the first half of the course. Well, I had that same half of the course for several semesters, and it's kind of like, okay, I could have used the information on the topic we were supposed to cover. So that you expand that out to the program level, and it really becomes a major issue because you have so much of that overlap, or just not figuring out where we're supposed to be going with what we're doing. So great points. Let's talk a little bit about, and I know this can be a touchy one. What resistance to online education are you seeing from administration, from faculty, and from students? Whether it's at your current institution or at a previous institution.
Well, I think there is still the mindset that online education is inferior. I mean, you know, I see it in you see it in the K to 12. I happen to be married to a public school principal. So, I hear it in her circles, and then I hear it, at other institutions, and the institutions, and especially within the CCCU that are still, we're a traditional face-to-face, So I think part of it is there's still that question of the online realness of it. So I think that's out there. I think there is also a tension of, what we've always done. We've always been in a classroom, these four walls, these chairs, and now all of a sudden you have faculty, they're living all over the world. And so that's hard to mesh with some people's thought processes. It goes back to honestly, I believe either we have a fixed mindset or we have a growth mindset. And when we begin to embrace and think through that growth mindset, we can begin to see that some things are good, even though they're different. And I think that's very critical.
Good points.
Yeah, I'd like to tag on to Carson's statements there. I think that I see resistance mainly from the faculty, which generally holds the ability to approve new degrees and those types of things. And if I can pick out one generic thread that I've heard at multiple different universities, it's what Carson was saying is, well, online learning is inferior. It's better if they're in the classroom. And then that's balanced with, and there's a tension there with the administration saying, yes, it is, but let's not use that as a reason to discount the idea or its validity. It won't be made better unless you jump in and try and help us. And if I tag that back to one of the mistakes that colleges make is that tension doesn't get led well. I don't want to say managed well, but it doesn't get led to a positive conclusion. And there's 100 different reasons that are unique to the culture of different institutions. But that resistance is in some cases valid when faculty don't want to put out, you know, a less than great treatment of a degree program. And many colleges now find themselves in kind of a situation where they have to, some of them for COVID-related reasons, but others just for the sake of their own survival for cash flow. And then that just kind of adds fuel to the fire in that kind of conversation.
Well, and I always wonder, the ones that are so down on online education, have they taken the time to read the studies? Because you look at the studies that have been compiled by the US government, and surprise, surprise, but online education performs better in hundreds of studies than traditional does in the outcomes when we start looking at that. And that part of it, when I hear that from faculty, well, like, that's just subpar. I'm not saying that there are not, we just talked about bad examples of online education, but as a general model, it performs well. It has the options for student to be able to really soak in the material better and have that time when they're not right on the spot. Who else would like to speak to this one?
I worked as a trainer. I had to work with faculty and get them on board, get them to develop their online classes. And I saw a lot of resistance from them. And I think it's rooted, a lot of this resistance is rooted in fear and a lack of awareness. And so a lot of times I had to do some hand-holding just to get them on board. And then once they figured out that, oh, this is a good system and it works. And one of my teachers used to say it this way, you can touch every student in your classroom when it's an online class. And that just gives you that freedom. And I saw a lot of faculty who were resistant when they finally figured out that it works. Then they were more willing to learn, to learn the system. The other resistance I've seen is from older adult students who are, again, it goes back to fear. Oh, I don't know how this technology thing works. Oh, I've never done it this way, as opposed to your millennials who are eager for online learning. So there's that bit as well.
I had two thoughts here. One, I think of equivalency theory, you know, and what it basically teaches in terms of online education is that we need to have the same learning outcomes, but we need to realize that we're trying to squeeze a square peg into a round hole if we achieve those things in the same ways. And part of it is just you don't know what you don't know. So if you've got traditional faculty have no idea, you know, or worse, don't even believe in andragogy, nor don't believe in andragogy, then I think that the first step is education, helping them to learn what they don't know.
Yeah.
The other piece of this, though, the broader perspective, I think that generally speaking, if you study change theory, individuals resist change to the degree to which they think that it's going to negatively impact them. And if you were to look up a little something on the internet, just Google in changecycle.org. If you've not seen this, it's a cycle that goes from red to yellow to green. And I have it right here. And the idea here is that when somebody is, this is how people feel when they go through change. And when you look at this, it's based on research, you can actually become a change cycle, like consultant kind of person, right? And, but anyway, so listen to some of these words. So when you start off with stage 1, you're feeling loss. You're experiencing loss. Your feeling is fear, your thoughts are cautious, and your behavior is paralyzed. And then you're making progress in stage 2 when you go from loss to doubt. And there you have feelings of resentment. Your thoughts are skeptical. Your behavior is resistant. Think about this in the lens of faculty, right? Traditional faculty. Then you go to yellow, and you are moving to discomfort in stage 3, where you have feelings of anxiety, your thoughts are confused, and your behavior is unproductive. And then there's a really interesting danger zone in red at 6 o'clock. And the idea there is that if you don't continue to push through that change, then the whole organization falls into the red and reverts back to stage 1.
Mm.
But if you push through it, then you move to discovery, where you have feelings of anticipation, thoughts are resourceful, you become energized, then understanding, characterized by confidence, pragmatism, and productivity. And finally, back to my culture piece of my talk this morning, just the way we do things around here, right? When you've really arrived in terms of the integration of online instruction, then there are feelings of satisfaction, thoughts are focused, and the behavior is generous. And so I just think that's a really great way of looking at it, that change cycle. And, you know, the reality is that it's not like, oh, did that once for the whole faculty, because you've got new people coming in, people leaving, you know, and these feelings are really deep seated because, you know, if you do start to look at programs that are losing money and you eliminate those programs, you've just eliminated those faculty, the friends of whom now are all fearful, you know, feeling lost, clear back to stage 1 of the cycle. Yet I've already suggested that's what we need to do, but I don't do that very well. So.
This is the Betsy Kubler-Ross of change. So Betsy Kubler-Ross was the person who walked you through the stages of grief. So now this is just the Betsy Kubler-Ross of
That's right. It's
change.
very similar to that.
Yeah, I love it. I wrote it down. I'm gonna look at it. I appreciate that.
Dr. Simmons, you get an A. That was great.
That's right. Okay, how about let's move on to some of the things that are kind of helping your online programs to become more central to your standard operating procedures within your institution, and then what you're seeing around the country. What are some of the things that are taking place where you're seeing that happen?
I think in my university's history here, it was the realization that they had some years ago that the customers that we're serving, with at least the way mine is designed, it is a completely different customer. That once life has happened, you've got a job, a kid, a mortgage, you've got civic commitments, you've got church commitments, etc. Then the traditional kind of service that you would get out of a traditional campus no longer provides as much value as an intentionally designed set of services designed to accommodate what we would roughly call the working adult. And I think once that mental shift happens, then you're able to more successfully advocate for the resources necessary to come alongside that kind of student in the time frame that you need them to, with the services that you need them to, with the customer service attitude that you need to.
The way that this is the one thing that I remember from my dissertation: adults enmeshed in real life. That phrase captures it for me, at least, that they've got real life going on. That's really what they care about. School is just kind of a sideline thing. They need it, or they want it, but the real important things are over here doing something else, you know. Who else?
I might step on some toes here a little bit, and that's not my intention. So I'm just going to give that little disclaimer. You know, looking at I've been privileged to do some things with ABHE and Bible colleges that are kind of finding their way through this whole thing. And I think that in some of our institutions, we need to have a more clearly defined theology of vocation. And by that, I mean, there is not a higher calling. I've read the Bible through a few times. I don't see a higher calling to pastor or missionary. And there's nothing wrong with working here in Lexington, South Carolina, once you graduate from CIU with an MBA and making several $1 million. You know, and you don't do that just so that you can give 10% to the church and a little bit to CIU. You do that so that you can impact those in your sphere of influence for Christ. And I think we've got to have a more robust conversation about that. That impacts our SOP. So I'll tell you just a little interesting conversation. I don't think I'm giving away any confidences here. In our cabinet meeting a few weeks ago, we were talking about, so right now at CIU, we got 18,500 graduates serving around the world. And they're predominantly missionaries and pastors, because that is our 100-year history. We've only been doing the online, which is predominantly growth in other areas, other master's degrees, other AABS degrees, et cetera, for the last 6 or 7 years. And so here's an interesting conversation. So we're coming in 2 years to our 100th anniversary. In a decade, and I'm a big fan of thinking about the futurity of present decisions, because leaders author culture by the decisions they make. And so I'm really interested in conversations that revolve around, what if in 10 years, 50% of our grads are from the School of Business and Professional Studies instead of 10%? And what if it's like, instead of 2/3 pastor missionary, 1/3 others, now it's 50% pastor missionary, 50% others? I think that's a good thing if we have a clear theology of vocation. But I have colleagues that would probably talk about that as the slippery slope we ought to avoid. The other angle that I'll kind of come at this from is that, and this is just my personal opinion, I shared this at an ABHE conference I spoke at last year. So I think traditionally, if we go after the 3 students we've always tried to find as Bible colleges, then we're going to find 2, and then we're going to find 1, and then we're going to find none. But I think if we try to find 10, then 3 of them will still be like the traditional people we've always served. Mm-hmm. So I guess I'd choose that latter strategy.
Yeah, I think that's very insightful. One of the things that here at IW that we've been beginning to toss around and think about is putting a business's mission course in our MBA or an MSM. So to get people thinking around that mindset of your business can be your mission. And I think that is the way of the future. Absolutely.
Okay, let's move on to another question. And this is from one of our attendees here. We have a new reality. What will be the new needs of students in online settings, and how can we meet those needs?
I'll give my insight. I think some of the new needs are we're going to have more resources available for them for writing tutorials and then I think when we've got into this 30 years ago, IW, I told you the doors opened and people came and companies were paying for education and everything else. I think we're going to need to have scholarships available for some people, because that well has dried up where businesses are paying for degrees. And so we used to not have to worry about raising money for the what we call the non-trad side, but I think we have to be very intentional in raising money for those kind of scholarships and those kind of things. So those are my 2 areas I think we need to be mindful.
I'll jump in. I think that I want to tag on Carson's statement again. I think he's hit part of the nail here. There's a lot of stuff we could talk about. I think by and large, one of the things that has always kept me awake at night is that the private university industry, and here I'm talking about Christian colleges and secular private institutions, et cetera, has missed the conversation entirely on the dinner table conversation of affordability. And so often I see that online programs as an adjutant to the main campus are managed for cash flow and not for quality of delivery. But in that market, especially ones that predominantly appeal to the adult and or graduate student, they have a life cycle, just like a product. And once the market is flooded and that market is mature, the typical strategic response is to cut the price. As institutions, private institutions, we're not in a position to play the price game. We can be, but we typically do not. And that, I think, is a reality that is being faced by our clientele on both traditional campus and adult students. But it is one that I think as a group of competitors across the board, we simply don't do well.
Well, and I think part of it is, Seth Godin talks about your least viable market, and really going to looking at it, going, what is it that sustains what I'm doing? And part of that is figuring out what my market really is. I mean, so that leads back to, do we really do that work? Do we do that due diligence to make sure we know what that group is? And so then you can get to the point of, if we have the least viable market and we know that we're doing that and we're making sure that we're staying focused on meeting their needs, if we don't cut the price, what does that do to us? And of course, Seth talks about that being, a race to the bottom. Is when as soon as you start cutting the price, you're racing to the bottom, and at some point, someone's going to win, quote unquote. And in winning, they all lose, that sort of thing, because there just isn't enough to sustain doing what you're doing. Anyone else have more thoughts on the concept of the standard operating procedures being normalized for the online area?
I'll just add, I'm giving a lot of thought these days to services and care that happens on our traditional campus that has inherently not happened in our adult and online areas. Things like, it was mentioned earlier, tutoring, career services, all the beautiful initiatives of diversity and inclusion that are happening on our traditional campus. As provost, I'm working really hard with all parties to make sure that is something that is really happening across the whole of our university. These matters are matters that I think, to one of the people on this panelist group today talked about the margin, and so it inherently kind of gets difficult when you're looking at the margin, the cash flow that's typically seen from these kind of programs. I think that we have to really think hard and long on ways that we can layer in measures like tutoring and career services and chaplaincy and matters of the initiatives of diversity and inclusion that we want to have across the board of our campus. So these are don't know that I'm casting forth a idea that has a solution in it as much as just stating the tension that really exists in trying to navigate that. I think it's such an important role for all of us.
Good thoughts. Okay. When you think, and I'm gonna drill down into certainly areas that InterLearn covers more, and Janet has probably been involved in this most, but what effect has curriculum development for online programming had on the traditional faculty, if any, and should it have an effect? Janet, do you want to go first on this one?
Sure. I was smiling because I was thinking of all the faculty I've worked with. Yeah. And what effect has it had on traditional faculty? Well, so we've had traditional faculty who had to jump in and make these changes and create their online classes, and they resisted. And many of them, because we had a system in place and they had to follow the system, and so there was a lot of resistance. But once they figured out that how well it worked, a lot of them would come back and say, hey, can you help me figure out how to get my residential classes in a similar format? So they were sold, and then they became the biggest cheerleaders in their own colleges. So that was a sort of a really positive domino effect, if I call it that, And so that it was unexpected, but hugely welcome effect that took place on the traditional faculty. So that wasn't always the case, but it happened. Hey, so I'm going to celebrate those
Sure.
wins.
Right, right.
We're celebrating something similar at Southern Nazarene in that I think when we launched our design team that we now call the Center for Learning and Innovation, I think in year one, they touched 9 courses. And this year, I think they're well over 300 courses that they've been involved in the construction of or the tweaking of. And so it's been a fun thing to celebrate and watch just the trust level rising and rising and rising, what these designers and their expertise can bring to our traditional side. And so that synergy and collaboration, I think is a really fun thing to watch evolve at a school.
I want to pick up on what Tim said and kind of float this into the answer at number 9 there as well. What have you seen happening to institutions that are resisting online education? And just say, this is my opinion. I think that in the next decade now, and I think this has been accelerated by the pandemic. I think that for all faculty, there's going to be some minimum basic level of online instruction that becomes necessary for them to be perceived, if not really effective. I think that the bare minimal starting point is turning in assignments through Canvas in our case as an electronic document. And yet when I have these little talks now and then with our faculty at CIU, people will come up to me afterwards and say, it's kind of the newspaper thing. I still like to read a paper newspaper. I still like to put red marks on paper. And I'm thinking, why would you do that? I mean, you can highlight, annotate, you can do so much more with Canvas. SpeedGrader is so great. And we had Moodle before that, so it's so great because Moodle was so horrible. And but anyway, you get what you pay for, right? And so I think it's going to become a basic core competency. I'd love to see it written into promotion from assistant to, all the way up to full professor. I can't imagine, and I will just say this too. Some emeritus professors are our worst online instructors, yet that's where they want to teach. Mm-hmm. And I pay them more, And so at some point, and I have some, I've gone back to the dean and just said, I cannot in good conscience assign a course to this person anymore. And so, because they've never learned the core competency, it's like never learning a word processor, for heaven's sakes. And so I just think it's going to become a core fundamental ability that's only going to increase in importance.
One of the aspects that I have shared with groups for years, and this is going to step on all of our toes, is each one of us that has gone through an academic program is not prepared to be a teacher. And we're certainly not prepared to be an instructional designer, unless they were actually in those fields, the ones we were studying. And so as we look to our faculty to help them, whether that's helping them understand the aspects of online education or just good teaching. I'm not even wanting you to figure out how to do online and be a good instructional designer. I just want you to be a good teacher. We have to get into the mode of always educating them, always helping them grow, and helping them to understand that I'm not looking for you to be the same you in 5 years. I want you to continue developing yourself, learning the skill, polishing your skill, continuing to develop you as a faculty member. And it's easy, especially when you come out of your education program, to go, I've arrived. I want to be right where I am. I want to just rest a little bit. Okay, let's just sit here for a minute. And that sitting here for a minute can turn into months and years and decades if we're not careful. And so we as the leaders then have to be about helping them remember, hey, we're not staying where we're at. We got to keep pushing forward. Let's talk about that question 9 that Brian referenced. What have you seen happening to institutions that are resisting online education? The ones that say, well, we are a traditional institution. We really, that's our bailiwick. what's happening with those, and in what you've seen in the field?
Well, I'll jump in here. We're talking about, and let me make sure I understand the question, that you're asking for our input on colleges that are resisting online.
Right.
So this was in the news, so I'm not betraying a trust, but there are several colleges that have closed, and every college's storyline is unique, and especially those that lead to closure. So there's no one reason, but I was taken by the statement from the president at Grace College in Nebraska, closed a couple of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And it was widely publicized as saying that our incoming students were telling us that we needed to have this program and that program, and he listed out the subjects. But that wasn't what we were good at. We were good at teacher education, and he listed out some of the others. But what they had missed, and you can infer from what he said, was that they had forgotten that part of what they needed to always keep their eye on was innovation. And it wasn't until they had no other choice, the stakes were so high, we can either invest in one of these new programs, but it has to pay off this year, or we can do the exact same thing we did last year. We can't do both. And for them, it turned out to be too late by the time they came to that realization, and we all know what happened. I'd say that those kind of storylines should serve as a clarion call. And again, all universities are different in their storyline and how this happens. But there is a conversation on each of our campuses and on all of your campuses, if you're listening in, similar to something you've heard today, that brings this really close to home. And I would say, don't go around that, lean into it. It's only through that wonderful listing that we get from the Christian faith that we embrace people with other ideas and other methods. You may just stumble upon a big home run for your university and listening to what everybody has to say, even if you have a vested interest in it staying the same or proceeding down your particular path. That is something that is so important today as we all look for that lane that makes our institutions really, really successful, and it secures us for longevity for long periods of time.
I'll give a little boat analogy. So this last weekend, my wife cried as I sold our 1992 ski nautique that we raised our kids in. The guy drove it away. In the console of that was a stereo with a cassette player. A year ago, what kind of led to this was I bought a brand new pontoon boat. We live on Lake Murray. And my brand new pontoon boat, receiver, there's no place to stick a cassette tape. You sometimes can pick up on 93.1, the lake, that's the lake, this channel I like to listen to, but depending on what part of the lake you're on, it fades in and out. So the best way to play the stereo on the pontoon boat is just to connect with Bluetooth to your cell phone or whatever. So I guess I just have one word for colleges, universities that you don't embrace online instruction. 8-track tape.
Mm-hmm. Janet, Tim, or Carson, how about you? What thoughts do you have on that?
One word, just like Brian, but my word is obsolete. You don't want to be obsolete.
Yeah.
My word is closure.
Closure.
They're going to close.
Yeah.
They fiscally can't do it.
Yeah.
I think this group has really come up with a lot of good words. I love the cassette tape. I had an 8-track tape player in an old Mustang years and years ago. I get it. And I'm the only person in my household that loves seafood. And I tell you what, I am in heaven when I'm at the beach and find a really good seafood buffet. I like choice. And I think that the schools that refuse to move into adult, evening, weekend, online programs are just really not taking into account what the customer's needs are. I think that we really want to serve our customers at any place and space that they are. For some, that may be coming onto a campus like mine as a 19-year-old, or it might be coming to a campus like mine as an adult in their 30s in the evening, or it might be online somewhere across this country or around the world. And so I think it's so important for us, if we really believe in our mission, we really believe in the depth and breadth of who we are as Christian higher ed institutions, to take what we have to students in whatever means by which they want to receive it. So it's a missed opportunity.
Following up on what you just said, Tim, this is a little bit of a curveball for you guys. What do you feel like students are interested in seeing in the mix of their courses? So you have traditional programs, we have online, we have some blended stuff, we have some evening and weekend. Do you feel as though the model is just going to become a big mix of those, where students that are quote unquote traditional may come to the campus and have the interest of having some on-site courses and some online courses and some evening, some weekend, and it's just going to be all a jumble of offerings for the quote unquote traditional student versus the online adult student? Is that the direction that we're heading?
I'll make a comment here. I have really wondered if face-to-face adult ed will change significantly because of the experience of COVID. I think this because of just an anecdotal conversation I had with one of our employees. I passed her office just a few days ago, and I said, "You must be so happy your MBA cohort's back together. Once again, the buffet food can begin," and having to be pretty careful about that, of course, but you're back with your cohort. And she said, "Yeah, sorta." I said, "Tell me a little bit about yeah, sorta." She goes, "Well, I really came to like the convenience of the zooming in and the convenience that afforded me." And so I have to wonder if this pandemic situation isn't going to shift us or maybe change us significantly forever related to our face-to-face, that instead of coming one night a week, 4 nights in a row through the month, maybe it's one night a week this week, and maybe it's on Zoom next week, and maybe it's one night this week. Maybe there's some alteration or some hybrid that emerges as a part of face-to-face as a result of what our students have experienced, and quite honestly, I think have liked.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with you, Tim. The Hydroflex, or whatever you want to call it, is, I think, going to be something we're all going to have to look at. So we even had to change policy within the university that we allow that of the Zoom in counts as attendance. So I mean, because we used not to, but we now do, because students are enjoying it.
Yeah, we have the same conversation happening on our campus that Tim illustrated with his student there. Honestly, in my own personal research, I'm asking a slightly layered version of the same question, and that is, what's next beyond online?
Mm-hmm.
And it's one thing to help your university play catch up, but when are you going to get back to the game? And so the question is, what's out there on the cutting, bleeding edge of educational delivery that will inform and happen at my university 3, 5, 7 years in the future, and be the next new way of doing things? I'd sure like to know that now, and not be waiting for Carson to scoop me.
Any other thoughts?
If I can tag on to what Brett just said, what is the next thing? What is it? Virtual reality? Is it digital badges? Do adult learners really need to go through a 4-year program, or do they need something that their employer is looking for right now? Can we provide just-in-time learning? And does that have to take 4 years, or can that take them 3 months? But then they have the skills that they need to succeed at their job. We're really talking about competency-based education, and you see that in all of the research, you see that in the demands that are coming in from employers, from students. And if we don't listen in, I fear we're going to miss out. Yeah.
Yeah, you've brought up the concept of the competency-based education. Eric Ireland was asking the panelists to answer that, if you've got some thoughts on beyond what Janet has shared. But competency-based education certainly is, in my thinking, one of those things that we've got to move towards more effectively. Obviously, Western governors and others have been working at that model, but we've got to have that aspect of it to really help students along. Any other thoughts on whether it's virtual models or anything like that you feel like are next up?
I was talking to a colleague the other day, and he's developing really high-end content with videos, and he posed a question to me, and he said, so if we were going to work together, which we might, to create, let's just say, a small number of courses, 4 or 5 really high-level, engaging, video-based kinds of courses, he asked me, who would be your top 1 or 2 professors or top 1 or 2 programs that you would want to? I have to say, I had to really scratch my head on that one, to be honest. Of course, if you're at Indiana Wesleyan, you're thinking of Wilbur Williams, right? In Old Testament comes to mind right away. And his comment was an intriguing one, and I've not quite thought this all the way through. I've been kind of chewing on this, but he said, so like if you go to Netflix, which by the way is a good reason for us not to do Netflix now. I totally get that. This is just an analogy, okay? With the movie that they promoted not too long ago, which probably should have caused us all to cancel our Netflix accounts. But in any case, I'll just say, using Netflix still as an analogy, before we watch a movie, what do we watch? The trailer. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're expecting students to sign up for, 27-month PhD in organizational leadership for $28,000. And we're not showing them one snippet of one professor of one piece of content. I think there's something there in that. And I wonder if we start building bridges between universities where we share one another's content at a very high level with certain courses and certain professors. I wonder if that's what might happen down the road.
I think that tags on to what Dr. George was talking about earlier, that we've got to give that preview of what it's going to look like at test run.
Yeah. Well, guys, we're a few minutes past the end point. Thank you very much for your time today, guys.